So we've just finished having our first meeting. Our main task for today was to make a list of guidelines that everyone should follow so that we work more efficiently and work well as a group. We also assigned roles to everyone, so we all have a specific thing we have to do, which will help timetabling and stuff like that. One of our biggest issues so far has actually been finding a time to meet because we all have such hectic schedules. So we've actually been using Messenger and shared documents far more to communicate than actually meeting in person, which is working okay at the moment, but might become more difficult later on.
In our second meeting, we made a draft of all the questions that we could use in our interview, making sure that they weren't too specific, but also that they would target certain topics we wanted to focus on, such as each researcher's disciplinary identity and their methodologies. We also tried to make sure that we had no leading or loaded questions, nor that we were being too ambiguous with our statements. We also made sure that we were avoiding any bias in what we were saying. We then compiled a list of different researchers at UCL that we wanted to interview. In doing so, we looked at which researchers had the most interesting connections to our topic of crime. For example, we decided that the first person we wanted to email would be a professor of literature who worked a lot with crime, since we thought that they could bring a unique perspective into our discussion. We also finished writing a draft email that was approved by Rose during our seminar, which we later sent out to the researchers we wanted to interview. Finally, after the seminar, we also got feedback on our first draft of questions, which then allowed us to finish writing up a final list of them, as we realized that we did still have some leading questions, and which we had been trying to avoid. A couple of days after our seminar, we had sent out our email, and we already had gotten a reply, and then we had our first interview the next week.
In the first recording, Alfie and we record both in case of emergency. And in the beginning of this interview, we negotiated with the professor to tell her that her personal information and privacy will not be presented in our thesis, therefore to conform to the ethics standards. And also, because we watched the sample interviews, like bad interviews or good interviews, we just use some techniques in these sample interviews, like listen to the interviewees attentively and give them some appropriate feedbacks in order to guarantee that the interview can go smoothly and naturally.
One of the problems was in the first one I made a leading question because she didn't understand one of the questions about I can't remember what the question was, but it was basically if you find the material from other disciplines accessible.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, mentally or physically, and I was like, oh, well, explaining it both, and an example could be jargon, and then she talked quite a lot about that, so I don't know if I led her into that, but I think it was fine because she had such a lot to say about it that it must have been something that she thought anyway.
Ethical issues when you were doing the interview?
Yeah, so in the first interview, I read the introduction to the lady, but she wanted to know where the transcription, where the recording was going to go, and we hadn't written that in our introduction, so luckily Lee was there and she explained about the project and how it's an internal thing and it's not being published and stuff, and she wasn't worried about it at all, but she was just interested.
So we just finished the second interview, and I think it went really good. I mean, the second time we had less problems with the structure and how to really do the interview. The interviewee told us some interesting insight on her disciplinary identity and on her vision of crime.
And I did the second interview, and that one went a lot better because in the first she was speaking so much, and Lee and we didn't know how to stop her from talking and how to like control the
And
interview.
it ended up going on for about, like 40 minutes.
For 40 minutes exactly, but then the first one was bang on like 20 minutes because she like said a lot less, but we just directed the questions a lot better, and I kind of like changed the questions, like it was less like just going through, like if she'd already covered something I wouldn't ask her again, like so she didn't have to keep rephrasing herself.
Yeah, and you'd already made like one mistake, so you were cautious of not doing that again. So I feel like that's quite easy to fall into. So our next step at the moment is that we're just starting to transcribe all the interviews that we've done so far, and just look through all the information we have. So we still have one interview left to do, I think.
Yeah, we still have one interview, and the person we want to interview isn't actually responding to any emails. So we're about to email someone else, our third choice of interview. So that's a bit of a problem, but hopefully we'll get a response soon.
We're running out of time a bit, but I think we still have enough time to do another interview, and we're ahead of schedule.
Done 2 interviews successfully, but I'm finding it really difficult to find a third interviewer because we've run out of everybody on our list, but they don't seem to be replying. So I think we're going to wait till noon tomorrow, and then if we don't get anybody, then we're going to reach out to Rose.
So we didn't manage to find a third interviewee by ourselves, so we contacted Rose, and she connected us with a professor who works in the science and technology department.
So we had our third interview yesterday. It was a bit more of a challenge than the other ones because the professor we found wasn't actually researching crime. He was more researching like science, weapons and stuff. But we had to rewrite a few questions to make it make sense. But other than that, it was really useful, and we did manage to link it to crime, and he understood things about how his discipline related to crime and his research as well. So it was really useful.
Just finished transcribing all our interviews. We had a few struggles, so sometimes you couldn't understand what was being said in the recording, and we had one very long interview, so we learned from that mistake of not going over interview time, but we're finished transcribing now, so that's great.
So during our third and final meeting, we brainstormed different ideas that we each had on the themes present in each interview and how we could relate them to each other so we could start thinking about our final write-up. We also looked over some issues that arose during our transcribing. For example, we looked over some parts of certain interviews that were confusing and at times inaudible, and together we were able to fully finish all of the transcriptions.
So how have we maintained our ethical standards in this?
So during transcription, we've made sure not to use any names, and we haven't saved like the files as the person's name, and we haven't included any identifiable features or anything like that. So it's all anonymous.
In our research, we informed our interviewees that their personal information will remain anonymous throughout the whole period of the interview. And if they ever wished to withdraw from this interview, they can stop the interview at any stage if they would like. And finally, we also made sure that our interview were held in comfortable environment so as not to put our interviewees in any awkward situations. We also focused on small details such as showing up on time to our appointments, dressing respectfully, and being polite during each interview. I think this was all outlined in a research ethics checklist that we completed in one of our seminars as a group. I should say that working in our group is a very good experience because, in our group we try to get together every week to discuss what we have done last week and what we are going to do in the next week.
I still remember the first gathering that we had. We discussed what we have learned from the lectures and determined our research topic. I think it is very helpful and interesting to work in a group because you can learn from your team members about their strengths, how they think about a research topic, how they approach this research topic. So I think working in a group can help you to learn from other people's thinkings, like know different perspectives. And I think because everyone in our group, we can perform our role like editor, interviewer, and the people for connecting other professors. We can perform our roles well. So the research process of our project is going on smoothly. Thank you.